This is not just a murder story. This is a story about a child who begged for help and a system that looked away. By the end of this video, you'll understand why millions call this the case that exposed humanity's darkest side. Stay with us and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is real and unforgettable. An ordinary neighborhood with an unthinkable secret. From the outside, the apartment complex looked ordinary. Children played nearby, cars passed by, life moved on as usual. But inside one small apartment in Palmdale, California, something horrific was happening. Something so cruel that when the truth finally came out, the entire nation would be forced to confront an uncomfortable question. How did everyone miss this? Meet Gabriel Fernandez. Gabriel Fernandez was just 8 years old. He loved superheroes. He loved his little brothers. And despite everything, he still believed adults were supposed to protect him. But Gabriel lived in constant fear, not of strangers, not of the outside world. He was terrified of the people who were supposed to love him most. A childhood marked by pain. From a very young age, Gabriel's life was unstable. He was passed between relatives, moving from home to home. Teachers noticed bruises. Social workers received reports. Family members raised concerns. And yet, again and again, Gabriel was sent back to the same place. Back to the apartment. Back to the abuse. Back to the nightmare. The people who were supposed to help. This case wasn't hidden in darkness. It was documented. Teachers filed reports. School staff noticed injuries. Social workers visited the home. Police had contact with the family. There were over 60 reports connected to Gabriel's welfare. And still, nothing changed. This wasn't just a murder. It was a systemic failure. What was happening behind closed doors? Inside the apartment, Gabriel endured abuse so extreme that even seasoned investigators later struggled to describe it. He was beaten, starved, humiliated, punished for things no child should ever be punished for. At times, he was forced to sleep in a locked cabinet. At times, he was denied food while others ate. And through it all, Gabriel kept going to school, trying to be normal, trying to survive. The notes that broke hearts. One day, a teacher noticed something chilling. Gabriel had written a note. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was a confession of pain. The words revealed fear, suffering, and a child who knew something was terribly wrong, but didn't know how to escape it. This should have been the moment everything stopped. It wasn't. The warning signs everyone saw. Neighbors heard screaming. Relatives reported concerns. Authorities documented injuries. And yet, each time the system reset. Case closed. No further action. Child returned home. This is where the story stops being just about one family and becomes about humanity itself. Because abuse doesn't survive in silence alone. It survives when people choose not to act. The final days. In the weeks leading up to Gabriel's death, the abuse intensified. His body showed signs of repeated trauma. His spirit was breaking, and still no one intervened in time. On a February day in 2013, Gabriel was rushed to the hospital. He didn't survive. The boy who had endured unimaginable pain was gone. When the truth came out, doctors immediately knew something was wrong. Gabriel's injuries were not accidental. They were severe. They were deliberate. The investigation that followed would shock even veteran detectives. And when the details became public, outrage spread across the country. People asked, how could this happen in America? How did no one stop it? Who is responsible when a child is failed by everyone? Why this case changed everything? This murder did more than expose cruelty. It exposed broken systems, institutional neglect, a society that saw warning signs and moved on. Gabriel's death forced a national conversation about child welfare, accountability, and what happens when compassion fails. What you're about to hear wasn't hidden. It was documented, reported, written down, and yet nothing stopped it. In this chapter, we reveal how dozens of warnings were ignored, and how the system meant to protect a child helped seal his fate. Stay with us. The reports that should have saved him. By the time investigators reopened Gabriel Fernandez's case, they uncovered a disturbing truth. This wasn't a secret abuse case that slipped through the cracks. It was a case flooded with warnings. Over 60 documented reports had been made to child services, law enforcement, and school officials. 60. Each one was a chance to intervene. Each one was a chance to save a life. And each one was closed. Teachers saw the injuries. At school, Gabriel's teachers noticed things they couldn't ignore. Bruises in unusual places. Frequent injuries with inconsistent explanations. A child who flinched at sudden movement. Educators followed protocol. They documented concerns. They made reports. They did what they were trained to do. But the system beyond the classroom failed to act. Social workers entered the home. Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services sent social workers to Gabriel's home multiple times. They walked through the apartment. They spoke to the adults. They observed the environment. And yet, again and again, reports concluded, no immediate danger observed. But what investigators later learned was chilling. Some visits were brief. Some relied solely on caregiver explanations. Some ignored visible warning signs. This wasn't just neglect. It was systemic complacency. The adults who controlled the narrative. Inside the home, Gabriel lived under the control of adults who carefully managed appearances. When authorities arrived, stories were rehearsed. Injuries were explained away. Blame was redirected. And because Gabriel was a child, frightened, conditioned, and intimidated, his voice was often dismissed. When a system listens more to abusers than victims, the outcome is devastating. Neighbors heard what no one investigated. Multiple neighbors later testified they heard screaming, crying, violent arguments. Some reported what they heard. Others assumed authorities were already involved. This is where the story exposes a harsh truth about humanity. When responsibility is shared by everyone, it's often carried by no one. The notes Gabriel wrote. One of the most heartbreaking discoveries came from inside Gabriel's backpack. He had written notes, not dramatic pleas but quiet confessions, words that reflected fear, pain, and confusion. These notes would later become evidence that Gabriel knew he was in danger, and that he tried, in his own small way, to be heard. Why the case was closed again and again. So how did this keep happening? Investigators later found patterns. Heavy caseloads, incomplete follow-ups, poor interagency communication. Each agency assumed another was handling it. Each closed file became another mischance. This wasn't one failure. It was dozens of small failures stacking into a fatal outcome. The escalation no one stopped. In the months before Gabriel's death, the abuse intensified. Not because no one knew, but because no one intervened decisively. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The closer Gabriel came to danger, the more invisible he became to the system. The final warning signs. In the weeks leading up to the end, school staff noticed worsening injuries. Gabriel appeared increasingly withdrawn. His physical condition visibly declined. Still, responses were delayed. Still, the process moved slowly. Time, the one thing Gabriel didn't have, was wasted. The day everything collapsed. When Gabriel was finally taken to the hospital, medical professionals immediately recognized signs of severe abuse. There was no ambiguity, no confusion, no accident. What they saw triggered an immediate criminal investigation. Only then did the system act with urgency. But by then, it was too late. The investigation turns inward. As detectives began reviewing the history, something unprecedented happened. The investigation didn't stop at the family. It turned inward toward the system itself. Case files were pulled. Decisions were questioned. Supervisors were interviewed. And the question everyone asked was the same. How did this happen with so many warnings? Public outrage explodes. When the details became public, the reaction was immediate and explosive. People weren't just angry at the perpetrators. They were angry at child services, law enforcement, the justice system. This case struck a nerve because it wasn't rare, felt possible anywhere. Why this case exposed humanity's dark side. This murder didn't just reveal cruelty. It revealed something deeper: how bureaucracy can override compassion, how fear of liability can outweigh urgency, how systems designed to protect can become shields for inaction. That's why this story resonated across the country, because it forced society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always win by force. Sometimes it wins through neglect. When investigators looked closer, they realized this wasn't just about one child or one family. This was about a system that had documented the danger and walked away anyway. In this chapter, the truth comes into focus, arrests are made, and the blame begins to shift. Stay with us. This is where everything changes. The case becomes a criminal investigation. Once medical professionals confirmed the cause of death, the case immediately shifted. This was no longer a child welfare matter. It was now a homicide investigation. Detectives stepped in. Evidence was secured. And the home that had once been visited casually by authorities became the center of a full criminal probe. For the first time, no one was taking explanations at face value, uncovering the pattern. As investigators reviewed Gabriel's history, something disturbing became clear. The abuse followed a pattern. Not random, not accidental, not isolated. It was ongoing, escalating, and well-documented. Each report told a piece of the same story. Each injury fit into a timeline that had been ignored. What shocked detectives most wasn't just what happened. It was how predictable it had been. The arrests that shocked the nation. When authorities announced arrests, the news spread rapidly. People expected justice to focus solely on the household. But then came the unexpected development. Investigators weren't only looking at the individuals directly responsible for the abuse. They were examining everyone who had failed to intervene. This case was no longer about one crime. It was about responsibility. Charges are filed. Prosecutors filed serious charges connected to Gabriel's death. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical findings, witness statements, documentation spanning years. This wasn't a case built on suspicion. It was built on records, many created by the very system meant to protect him. The spotlight turns to child services. As the criminal case moved forward, public attention turned sharply toward child protective services. Internal reviews began. Emails were subpoenaed. Supervisors were questioned. And slowly, a troubling picture emerged. Decisions had been rushed. Concerns had been minimized. Red flags had been dismissed as unsubstantiated. The system had treated danger as inconvenience. Courtroom revelations. As hearings began, courtroom testimony revealed details that left spectators stunned. Jurors heard how often authorities had visited the home, how many times injuries were explained away, how many opportunities existed to remove Gabriel from harm. Each testimony reinforced the same truth. This death was preventable. The emotional weight of accountability. This wasn't just a legal process. It was a reckoning. Professionals who had worked on the case were forced to answer questions publicly, not just about policies but about judgment. And for the first time, the system had to confront its own reflection. Public reaction reaches a boiling point. As media coverage intensified, public anger grew. Parents, teachers, advocates, they weren't just grieving Gabriel. They were asking, how many others are being ignored? How many warning signs are dismissed every day? How many children are still invisible? This case struck fear because it felt possible anywhere. The narrative changes. Before, the story was about abuse behind closed doors. Now, it was about institutional failure in plain sight. The title, The Murder That Exposed a Dark Side of Humanity, wasn't metaphorical anymore. It was literal, because cruelty didn't win alone. Indifference helped. Why this chapter matters. Chapter 3 is where the audience realizes something crucial. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about recognition. And for the first time, the system had to admit, we knew and we failed. That admission changed everything. The investigation expands. With national attention growing, oversight agencies stepped in. Policies were reviewed. Procedures were questioned. Reforms were discussed. But even as conversations began, one question lingered. Would accountability stop at words? Or would consequences finally follow? When the trial began, the courtroom wasn't just deciding guilt. It was deciding how much suffering society is willing to overlook. What jurors heard would haunt them, and everyone watching long after the verdict. Stay with us, because this chapter reveals the moments that broke the room. The courtroom fills with more than people. From the moment proceedings began, the courtroom carried a heavy silence. Not the calm kind. The kind weighted with grief. Family members filled one side. Media lined the back rows. Advocates sat quietly, holding notebooks filled with names. Other children, other cases, other failures. This trial wasn't just about one murder. It was about whether accountability could finally reach beyond the obvious. Opening statements. Two very different stories. Prosecutors spoke first. They laid out a timeline that jurors could not ignore. A chain of decisions, warnings, injuries, and missed chances. Their argument was clear. This death did not happen suddenly. It happened slowly over years while help stood nearby. The defense responded with a familiar strategy. Shifting blame, minimizing intent, reframing negligence as error. But even then, the weight of evidence loomed. Because this case wasn't built on hearsay. It was built on records. Testimony that changed the room. Witnesses began to take the stand. Medical professionals described injuries that could not be explained away. Former officials testified about caseloads, pressure, and protocols. But their words often landed hollow against documented warnings. Then came the testimony that changed everything. A witness read from reports written years earlier, detailing concerns that mirrored the final outcome almost exactly. Gasps rippled through the room. Jurors weren't just hearing facts. They were hearing predictions that came true. The moment the system was named. At one point, a prosecutor paused and addressed the jury directly. Not with anger, with exhaustion. We are not asking you to judge a mistake. We are asking you to judge a pattern, one that treated danger as paperwork. That sentence echoed beyond the courtroom, because for many watching, it felt painfully familiar. Defense arguments begin to fracture. As cross-examinations continued, cracks appeared in the defense's case. Contradictions emerged. Timelines didn't align. Explanations shifted. Responsibility blurred. What became clear was this: no one wanted to be the last line of defense that failed. Public reaction explodes. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered daily. Signs appeared. Candles were lit. Names were spoken aloud. Social media amplified every update. Parents shared stories. Survivors spoke up. Advocates demanded reform. The case had become a national mirror. People weren't just watching for justice. They were watching to see if the system would finally tell the truth about itself. The jury deliberates. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed, then days. Speculation filled the air. Could the evidence overcome institutional distance? Would accountability stop where it usually did? No one knew. The verdicts are read. When the jury returned, the room fell silent. One by one, verdicts were read. Some brought relief, some brought anger, some brought disbelief, but no one left unchanged. Because regardless of outcome, one truth had been cemented. This case would not be forgotten. The sentencing phase. During sentencing, impact statements were read. They weren't dramatic. They were devastating. They spoke of lost futures, unanswered questions, a childhood reduced to footnotes. Judges listened. So did the nation. The system responds, at least on paper. In the wake of the trial, agencies announced changes, new oversight, revised protocols, promises of reform. Press conferences followed. Statements were made, but skepticism lingered, because for many, words had come too late before. A cultural reckoning begins. This case didn't end with the verdict. It started conversations about accountability, about responsibility, about what care truly means. Journalists revisited old cases. Lawmakers cited the trial. Training manuals were rewritten. For the first time in a long time, the spotlight didn't fade immediately. Long after the courtroom emptied and the cameras turned away, one question refused to disappear. Did justice truly win? Or did humanity simply promise to do better next time? This final chapter reveals what changed, what didn't, and why this case still matters today. Stay with us until the end. When the world moves on, the news cycle eventually did what it always does. It moved on. Another story replaced this one. Another headline took its place. Another tragedy competed for attention. But for those closest to the case, time didn't soften anything. It sharpened it. Because when public outrage fades, reality remains. The people left behind. Families returned home without closure. Advocates returned to work with heavier hearts. Professionals returned to desks carrying quiet guilt. There were no parades for reform, no dramatic endings, just lives forever altered. Some spoke publicly, others never spoke again. Each carried the weight differently, but none escaped it. What changed on paper? In the months following the trial, official changes were announced. Updated child protection protocols, increased oversight and reporting requirements, new training programs and internal audits. Press releases described these reforms as historic. But critics asked a harder question. Why did it take a death to trigger action? The limits of accountability. Some individuals faced consequences. Others quietly resigned. Many stayed. The system acknowledged failure, but only in fragments. No single verdict could address years of neglect. No sentence could undo a preventable loss. Justice, while pursued, arrived incomplete. And for many viewers, that was the most unsettling truth of all. The broader pattern emerges. As journalists revisited similar cases, patterns emerged. Warning signs ignored. Families dismissed. Institutions protected from scrutiny. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was a symptom of systems designed to manage risk, not eliminate it. Why this case still resonates. Years later, people still search for this story. They watch documentaries. They read court transcripts. They leave comments asking the same question. How did this happen? The answer is uncomfortable because it implicates more than criminals. It implicates culture. It implicates priorities. It implicates indifference. The dark side of humanity revisited. The title of this story isn't about violence alone. It's about what happens when empathy becomes optional, when warnings become noise, when responsibility becomes paperwork, when suffering becomes routine. That is the dark side exposed. Not just cruelty, but complacency, what viewers can't unsee. Once you know the story, you can't unknow it. Every similar headline feels heavier. Every ignored warning feels louder. Every unfortunate outcome feels avoidable. That's why stories like this matter. They don't just inform, they confront. The question that remains: if systems failed once and admitted it, what prevents them from failing again? Policy changes help. Awareness helps. Accountability helps. But vigilance matters most. Because systems don't protect people. People protect people. Why this story was told. This story wasn't told for shock value. It wasn't told to sensationalize pain. It was told because silence allows repetition. And exposure, however uncomfortable, is the first step toward change.